Hey everybody, Brendan here. Welcome back to another tournament game analysis video. Today we're going to be covering round 3, not round 2, of the March, or was it April? There's so many months in the year. One of those events. And unfortunately, my round 2 was a no-show, so that invalidated any norm chances right off the bat. And also meant that I was waiting at the tournament hall for like 6 hours, which is a bit upsetting. That's a long time to wait. It's not like I know the next round's pairings or anything. So I was just kind of sitting around all day and just chilling. And now I'm playing in round 3 at the end of the day with the black pieces against Andy. So we see e4, and I of course go into a Sicilian. Now, after this position, I play knight to c6, which is the classical Sicilian, and then my opponent plays bishop to e2. Now, this is definitely a decent option for those that are playing against the classical Sicilian if you're not really sure exactly what you should do. There's an issue for me that's about to appear already. And that is that some of the source material I was reading at the time would recommend a certain setup. Is it a bad setup? Absolutely not. It is applicable here, but it's not what I'm good with. It's the dragon with g6. So the whole point here is that when you play the move g6, you're saying that this move bishop to e2 is a pretty inadequate move in these dragon setups. And that is true, but that also means that you have to be okay with dragon setups. And even good dragon positions, to me, are a bit uncomfortable. I guess another option could have been to play something like e5. And one of the typical ways that masters end up playing here is going knight to f3, where after h6, castles, bishop to e7, rook to e1, castles, h3, and then bishop to e6, you can get a position like this, which I think is quite reasonable, but you have to be okay with this weak square on d5. And because I haven't prepared anything like this, who knows? I might not even be able to play this position well. In experience, I don't know if I do either, actually, but let's just see how the game turned out instead. So again, going back to bishop to e2, if we instead take a dragon move order, for example, after knight c3, we go g6, a move like bishop to c4 is a bit more aggressive. The whole idea here is that, well, you're trying to take out the full maximum of the position. For example, I think it's bishop to e3, bishop g7, f3, something like this, castles, and then bishop to c4. This bishop is quite nice here, as it attacks the f7 pawn, pinning it, and it also makes moves like h4, h5 a lot more deadly. And because the bishop's on e2, it's just not really the same. So bishop to e3, I go bishop to g7, queen to d2, and I go knight to g4. This is one of the two good options. You could also castle, but I think strategically this move makes a lot of sense. The whole point here is that you are trying to grab the bishop pair, and almost regardless of the Sicilian, grabbing the bishop pair is quite a nice idea for either side, not just for white and not just for black. So after knight takes on c6 and then taking on g4, I'm actually quite happy here. It doesn't really feel like I'm any worse. Am I better? No. But worse? No, definitely not, in my opinion. We see h3, bishop to e6, and then bishop to d4. So there's an interesting way to play this, which I was deliberating over in the game. It's the move f6. Now, f6 is actually quite strong. The whole idea is that you're going to be playing a move like c5 next to make sure that you get full control over this diagonal. For example, a move like castling is pretty bad. We can play something like queen to a5, but one of the big ideas is to play c5. For example, let's just say g4 is played. Or no, g4 is a little too easy. Just find a nothing move. Maybe king to b1. It's a good move, but kind of a nothing move as well. You go c5, and then eventually you go at f5, and you open up this bishop with a pretty nice effect. Instead, I ended up castling here after enough thought because I just couldn't really work that out. I already got the bishop pair, and even though I'll be giving it up here, didn't feel so bad. Now, after castling, they ended up taking on g7 and then castling short instead, where I go queen to a5, and then we see queen to d4. And again, the move f6 is actually quite a nice one. Playing this move, it looks a little bit weakening at first until you realize the only thing it weakens is e7, a pawn that's not easily attacked at all. So this doesn't really actually create any problems. And a sample line would go b3, I think a natural move trying to get these Maroczy setups, rook f d8, and then queen to e3. And eventually, yeah, you go bishop to f7, and then you're ready for d5. And black, in my opinion, has equalized. And playing a move like taking on d5 would actually be a bit of a mistake, because after recapturing, first off, e7's not hanging because we can take this knight on c3, but we're going to be ready for e5 and d4 next, and this center is quite strong, and it's a big problem for white. So I ended up playing king to g8 instead, because I was still worried that maybe f6 could cause some weaknesses. And I guess one way that king g8 could be worse is when f4 comes, you're worried about this bishop. But the problem is f4 is not quite ready yet. Maybe a move like king to h1 is a bit smarter, because after f4, which was played in the game, we can go queen to b6. The whole idea is simply to trade, and that most Sicilian endgames favor black because, again, you usually have a little bit more central control, and the pawn islands or the pawn structure is just a little bit nicer for black. At least that's what it feels like, especially in these positions. So queen takes b6 was played. If they moved back, then I would just take either way. For example, if queen to f2 or even rook to d1, maybe I could even wait a move, something like rook to b8 and then take. But eventually that's the plan, is to take. Also b2 is under attack. I don't see a reason to go for that first. It just creates complications for no reason, but something like rook f b8 and then maybe targeting b3. So, or b2 and forcing them to play b3. But yeah, queen takes b6, a4, and now I play f6. And f6 again is just a really useful move. It makes sure that e5 is a little bit uglier to play because maybe we take it once and then push something just to isolate an e5 pawn. Or maybe it's just because we want to be able to retreat the bishop back to f7. And yeah, again, it's not really hurting us because the only weakness that could be a thing to worry about here is this e7 pawn or this diagonal that gets opened, but neither of them can be taken advantage of in any of these endgames because they don't have a light squared bishop. So b3, I go king to g7, knight to e2, and bishop to d7. The whole point is this is prophylaxis against knight to d4, just making sure that if this move comes, then I can consider a move like c5 or just do nothing at all, but I have the flexibility to choose because c6 is defended. Whereas if I leave the bishop here and I play something like rook d8, let's just play it, and then knight to d4 comes, I'm forced into playing a move like bishop to d7, where maybe this rook would have been better on b8 or on c8 instead by playing that move first. For example, again, bishop d7, if they go knight d4, maybe I could play something like rook to c8 or rook b8. But again, it's a difference in flexibility. So c4 was played. And then I play h5, just trying to gain space on the side of the board. And now f5 was played. And then g5 was played. So it's very easy to overlook moves like this. My thought here was, my king's over here. Maybe I should be a little bit more careful. They have a bit more space. Also, taking doesn't really make sense because if I ever take, then it actually does open up a weakness or open up a line against the e7 pawn, and it does mean it's weak now. But there's something else going on too that's a bit more important, and that is that after taking and the move king to f7, moves like rook to g8, rook to g5, this rook over, or just trying to win this pawn outright are a massive problem for white, and black has a significant advantage here. But I didn't consider it. I just played g5 because I was happy to potentially close things down over here, put more things on light squares, which I don't think is a wrong strategic idea. It's just incorrect in the short-term strategy, and I guess you could say tactically. It feels like it's almost a tactical idea to play king f7, rook g8, because you do get some king side play, and you do target that weak f5 pawn. But king to f2, I go rook to a7, so the potential of doubling up is now possible, or maybe I just play something like rook to b8. I'm trying to keep my intentions a little unclear here. Knight to c3, and now rook to b8. White plays g4, and it's really tempting to take on g4, but I ended up playing rook to h8, rook to a8, and then h4. The reason why is because I'm actually quite happy to put more and more pawns on light squares because of my light square bishop. I'm hoping that one day this actually matters. So king to g2 was played. And now I go back with rook a7. Again, it feels like I have a bit of flexibility here. I get to kind of choose what's going on, but also so does white, especially because of their next move, which is b4. b4 now sets up a lot of ideas, which is c5, b5, or a5. I'm not really sure what's going to be played. So I want to play things close to the chest and as carefully as I can. And that's when I come up with the move rook to c8. Again, doesn't really look like much. It was either rook to c8 or rook to b8, but I do think that the rook on c8 actually benefits quite a bit here. The first big reason is because it's opposing this knight on c3 that is undefended, but also it just means that in a world where, for example, things start getting traded or anything, and I maybe play something like rook to b7, maybe I could double up on this side of the board if necessary. Yeah, it just felt like rook to c8 felt correct. Yeah, but rook h to c1 was played, opposing this move. And now I play bishop to e8. So the idea here is I am ready for bishop to f7. And I'm trying to kind of make sense of what white's plan is, because if they're not careful, c4 will be targeted at least once, and if they ever move their knight, that means they weaken their control over a4, and again, it's just kind of a back and forth where it feels like I'm the one pressing. And now white breaks through, or breaks out in the position with a5, which is it feels a little bit just poorly timed. And the reason why is because after I take and rook takes, I can play rook to b7. And now I'm attacking b4. The bishop on e8 is perfectly aligned to help prevent b5 if they ever try to go for a move like this. And also, the rook on c8 is now perfectly placed. This is kind of what I was trying to hide any intentions of trying to like just give it away before. But yeah, for example, if they play b5 here, there's just a massive problem on the c file, and the fact that b5 is excellently defended. So rook to b1 was played. And now I played bishop to f7. So we're seeing the problem is that everything is just being attacked. b4 is attacked, and now c4 is attacked. And both of my rooks are perfectly placed for the moment. And then c5 gets played, which is very, very logical. And this is just trying to help make sure that I don't target anything else. If I end up taking, this would just be really, really ugly. They can now take on c5, and a move like b5 actually might be ready. So what do you do here as black? And I think there's only one good option, and that is rook to d8. The whole point is now I'm ready for a move like d takes c5, and I'm not actually scared of it at all because I will get a lot of activity with rook to d2. So the only move to defend here is rook to b2. Simple as that. You're not really as scared of rook to d3. I mean, it's still pretty hard to look at this position, for example, and just say, yeah, I'm okay. But you actually are. You can, I think, take on c6 without any issues and just go king to h2. Looks a little scary at first, but, you know, just 1 or 2 moves later, if you just visualize it, not actually that bad. Instead, b5 was played. I think they were just trying to explode the position open a little bit. And I wasn't sure what to make of this move. I probably should have calculated this out, but I don't recall doing so. Or if I did, it was not to the extent of what happened. Because after taking on b5, it turns out that they can actually take with this rook, with the b rook. It's very important that this rook is taken, or it takes on b5. And the idea is that after rook to c7, c5 is sufficiently defended, so they can just play a move like knight to d5, and things are actually totally okay here. But why, oh why, is rook a takes on b5 not a good move? And it turns out that rook c7 is a massive problem. We are again trying to target this knight on c3, where after a move like rook to d1, making sure that if we ever take, for example, now if we take, we actually end up losing this rook on d8, or if we do it the other way, we just lose it immediately. It's just trying to prevent that, so it's preventing us from winning this pawn tactically. But now we can play rook to a8, and now white is losing this pawn tactically, which is, I think, pretty cool. And also very hard to see, at least in my view. But that's why rook a takes isn't actually so good. But I didn't see that. I just took on b5. Again, one of the things is when you're just capturing things, you just kind of can find yourself doing the whole takes thing of you're not actually looking at what the next move probably should be. You're just, you know, capture, because like you think it should be that, and most of the time, like 90% of the time plus, usually is just you just capture things. But this was a bit too trigger happy, and after rook takes on b5, it's a bit hard to say where the advantage is. However, it does feel like potentially there is still something going on here, because as we can see, black's pawn structure is still slightly better. So if something can be done, for example, winning this pawn, that's a big deal. And it turns out that actually does happen. After rook to c8, my opponent played knight to a4. And the problem is bishop to e8. It's a very easy move to miss. But after bishop to e8, you're forced to defend your knight. And after you defend your knight, or do something else like this, captures, and then rook takes on c5, black is up a full pawn. Eventually could play something like d5, maybe even e6, but most importantly, they're the only ones pushing here. You could also argue that you can take with the pawn. It looks quite good to me. But yeah, this trade is just horrendous, so you can't really allow it. But knight b6 was played instead, going for the minor piece ending, which to me arguably is the worst of the two, mainly because there's so many rook endings where there's a lot of counterplay. And it feels like minor piece endings usually are easier to win. Now I'm going to say that with a big asterisk because of how this game went. But yeah, generally still I think that having the rooks would be better than having the minor pieces here. So I took on c5, they took, and then knight to d5 was played. I defended my e7 pawn. They go king to f3, and then bishop to c6. And of course, if they play something like king to e3, I will be taking on d5. 100%. I wouldn't have to think at all about this, because you don't really even need to calculate too much to see that once king c4 gets played, you play king to d6. And if not, you can even try to go to this side of the board. I think you still have to be careful here. Let me think. King to c3. Does this work? Let me turn on the engine. Yes, king c7, king d3, king b7. It does find the win, apparently. King c3. Okay, king a7 or king c7? What about king a6? Yeah, king a6 is the way to do it. So the whole idea here that I had no idea of is that you actually want to go to a6 instead of b6 immediately, because if you go to b6 you can't go to a6, but if you go to a6 you're threatening to both go to b6 and b5. If you can go to b5 then it's a very easy win, but if king c4 now king b6, you're just trying to force this position where it's white to move, which is why you do have to be careful here of playing the immediate king b6, as after king c4 you have to move away and give up your c pawn, which isn't good. I knew that. So knight to c3. I go king to e8. I'm trying to get over to either the center or the queen side to make use of this pawn. They go king to e3, bishop b7, knight to a4. Bishop to b7 also kind of was unnecessary. I think moves like king d7 is just a clearly better option. But my idea with bishop to b7 was that if king d3, then I can give the check and then move up to c6, which would accelerate me winning the game. But after knight to a4, it's a little awkward because now I have to be a bit careful of losing this pawn. And yeah, if I push it, then king to d4 feels like I'm gonna actually lose that pawn. But I found this resource, bishop to a6, which is good. The whole idea here is bishop to f1 is a massive threat. So knight c5, bishop to f1. I'm very, very happy to make this exchange because after I take on h3, the game is just over. Either this pawn promotes or I get to take on g4 next. But that paired with me moving my king up the board, there's nothing to do. King to f2 was played though, making sure bishop f1 wasn't possible. c4. And again, this is kind of the problem with bishop to b7 is there was this knight a4 idea where now all of a sudden this pawn kind of blocks me being able to activate on this diagonal. But yeah, king d7, king to e3, and now I go e6 because I desperately kind of need to make some sort of pawn break to make hopefully any type of progress. They go knight to a4. Now it's really tempting to take, but I don't want to have to deal with knight to c5, so I go king to d6. And the whole reason is that after they take on e6, I can go bishop to c8 and then just recapture like this, which I thought was really clever by them, finding this knight a4, but luckily things were kind of working out for me, even though I've been playing this endgame a bit sloppy at this point. So king to d4, bishop takes on e6. Now we see knight to c3, and I have a choice. So I played bishop to d7, which is actually a mistake. It turns out bishop to c8 is the best move. And the reason why is because after taking on c4, king to e5, king to d3, king to f4, knight to d5 check, king to g3, king takes h3, black is ready to eventually take on g4, or even just start trying to promote this pawn. The game's over. But with bishop d7, this loses a critical tempo. Now, can you remember where white's pieces were going in that previous variation? You may notice that when that knight went to f6, well, it was also covering or attacking that d7 square. With the bishop on d7, after king c4, king e5, and king d3, the problem is, if I keep going up the board with king to f4, now knight to d5 check just kind of hard stops the variation, because king to g3, knight takes on f6, I have to move away, for example, bishop to e6, and now a critical tempo, king to e3, actually does help white a lot. I can actually take this full pawn But after a move like king to f3, it's not really clear if black's able to make any progress. And it turns out that black actually can't at all anymore. So this was a big miss on my part. So instead, I played bishop to c8 because I did see that knight to d5 and knight takes f6 was a bit of a problem. I just wish I had seen a move previous when I played bishop d7 instead of bishop c8. So bishop c8, king to e3 now, and then bishop to a6. And we can see that I'm just trying to remaneuver the bishop over to potentially attack f1. And if I can, or not to attack f1, but to get to f1 to attack h3. And if I can get to f1 and attack h3, it's not really so easy for white. Either white has to bring their king back to defend f1, or they have to put their knight in a really defensive spot. And this is actually what they do. They go knight to d1. It's not the only way to play the position. It turns out you can actually play it a bit more aggressive with moves like knight to d5. But knight to d1 does make a lot of sense because when you see bishop f1 and knight f2, it does defend. But white does have a bit of a problem, and that is that their pieces are quite passive. And if we could just give them the move right now, I'm not sure what they would do. They can't play knight to d3. If they ever move their knight anywhere, we take h3. So what's the plan? It turns out that, yeah, it's kind of a zugzwang. They would have to go king f3 and it allows king to d4. I didn't see this immediately. I was kind of thinking conceptually around this point, and I can't exactly specify when I saw the idea, but you'll know that I saw it at least a move or two before when we see the next couple moves. So bishop g2, knight to d3. I end up moving up, king to c4, and then they played knight to f2. Turns out they had an amazing idea with knight to f4 here. Obviously e5 is the easiest way to draw the game, where after taking, you can play knight to f7, you take g5, it's just an immediate draw. You don't really have to calculate further than this. But after knight to f4, attacking this bishop, you're ready for knight to h5 if it's moved. And if you end up taking on f4, taking on h3, g5 draws the game. Because after bishop e6, you take on f6, where after h3, king g3, you go f7, force black to move this bishop away, and then you take on h3. For example, king to d4, f7 takes, and then king takes on h3. So yeah, that would be a draw. Instead, knight to f2 is played, and this just gives me another chance to find that other idea. So king c3, knight to d1, king c4, they go back, king c5, knight d3, and then king d6. I decided to go back here. And now, after knight to f2, I played bishop to f1, and I'm ready. So again, they have to go king to f3 here. And I know that I did see the idea at this point, because king to f3, I go king to e6, and then king to e5. It's important that I don't go king e5, otherwise you just have a repetition of that previous position about 10 moves earlier. But by playing king to e6, when white plays king to e3, and then I play king to e5, it's very important that, first off, this bishop is on f1. It prevents knight to d3, because we could just take that. Knight d3 takes, and then king to f4. Black will be winning this. And also, again, this king to f3, as I mentioned, is just not a pleasant move to make. You don't want to move this way either. This just is the worst of the few, because at least king to f3 stays near where you should be. But king d2, king f4, this is obviously over. And on the other hand, if king to f3, king to d4, I'm not sure what white does. At least I wasn't during the game, and neither was my opponent. He played e5, where I took, and the game shortly finished, but it turns out there's a beautiful idea, and that's knight to d1. The whole idea of this move is that once you take on h3, there's the move knight to e3, and the bishop on h3 is trapped. Now, when you hear that it's trapped, you think, oh, so black might be losing. Luckily, black is fine, and it's going to be a draw, but you don't get anything more than that. And to me, that's fascinating, because again, it felt like white was just so close to losing, but with this amazing resource knight to d1, turns out that white has enough of a defense to hold the game. And I think that this position, despite it being about -1 if you put it into various engines, I think it's a fortress. But neither of us saw that. So e5 was played. I took. And then knight to e4, a really good idea, with the idea of taking the g5 pawn. But I don't take on h3. Instead, you could just play a simple move like bishop g2. And the problem is, this forces a endgame where white's going to be down a pawn, and the game is just over. So after king takes on g2, I can take on e4, and the pawn will just end up promoting here. It doesn't really take too much longer at this point. And checkmate. Yeah, so that was a fascinating game with a lot of various positions where there was just one tempo or one square in one way or the other, with this again, this bishop d7 or bishop c8 idea. Also with just like the maneuvering of rooks for both sides, it felt really tense during the game. I remember that. It felt like even though the position was equalized pretty early on, it felt like it was anybody's game for the most part until we got to that pawn up ending. And even in that pawn up ending, that was not easy to convert. There was a lot of nuances there. But it was a fascinating one. And it was a game that was really exciting to play. Now, I still do think that I'm not really that good at the dragon, despite having done a full rapid game series on this channel over it. That was a bit of an attempt to try to learn a little bit more of the opening. But maybe I should spend a bit more time on it, not for the sake of wanting to play it, because I don't want to play the dragon, but I really should try to seek discomfort, so to say. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that game. Next one will be round 4. We're doing quite well in this tournament. Played an IM round 1, and this game was a really nice win in round 3. That's about it. All right. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.